Hello and welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethlie.
And we are the Youngs.
And we're so glad you've joined us today as we continue talking about books that can help and why. Did I get that title right?
Yes, we call it Books That Can Help and Why.
Oh, good.
And we're glad as we're into like our 9th week of this that we have the title right.
I have nothing. I have no words. No words.
That's not true. But we hope you have enjoyed this particular series. A little bit different. We have done a book study here and there as far as walking through a book before. But we just went through a lot of our own books, which we really felt profited us a lot, and little books we can recommend to you. We're looking at several varieties. We've had one on marriage, one on parenting, especially children that are younger, but it also spills into the teens. And then we talked a little bit about the bedroom, and then this one here is kind of back to marriage. What we've been studying this last week and this week is the book entitled Solving Marriage Problems by Jay Adams. And it's actually a book about biblical solutions for Christian counselors. Mm-hmm. But I thought in reading it that it just gave incredible information that could help any couple who wants to work on their marriage. And so to that end, we introduced it to you last week and laid out a few things. The book is primarily about marriage problems of all sorts. Mm-hmm. And he says it's about the causes of these problems, and for the counselor, how to detect, categorize, name, and describe the problems in a biblical manner. But then another part of it was ways of reaching biblical solutions to marriage problems.
Yes.
And most of us struggle at that. There's a lot of marriage issues that come up in a marriage, but it is often very challenging in our culture to find biblical solutions to the problems we face. But what we know is that a biblical solution is what makes all the difference.
I don't know. I just is sitting here thinking of a small caution. There are so many people who aspire to be a counselor and to do Christian counseling, which is a worthy pursuit, I do think. And we do need good, well-trained, well-educated Christian counselors in the area of biblical counseling. But when you're listening to this, try not to think to yourself, I need to get that book because that's going to help me because I need to help all of these people. One of the reasons that this book is so helpful is that you can take it and apply it to your own marriage and then strengthen your own marriage and then maybe take it and help somebody else.
That's not a bad point at all, and certainly worth our considering. As we jump back into things today, is there any other comment or anything we need to mention before we just kind of jump back into the book?
I don't think so. Do you know what we're going to cover next?
It'll be another book. So actually, it's
a book without a title.
We're actually going to be talking about the DNA of parent-teen relationships. So
Okay,
a book just primarily for dealing with teenagers.
Right. And I think we did cover that in a previous episode.
We have mentioned it.
Yes. Okay.
But as far as covering, we've used several things from the book, but I thought giving the book a whole overview would be well worth doing.
Wonderful. Mm-hmm.
So let's jump back in here today to the book, Solving Marriage Problems. And last week we kind of closed with chapter 4. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the obligation of marriage is to vow to provide companionship for another for the rest of our lives. It's not about receiving companionship, but about giving it. And it was just a unique idea that when God made the original marriage between Adam and Eve, the original focus, first and foremost, was companionship because he was alone and he had no one to be with him.
Right.
No one to walk with him, to help him, to encourage him, no one who was suitable just for him. So companionship was the original idea. And of course, then it spilled over into reproduction as far as keeping the human race going. Mm-hmm. But then it also gave the responsibilities for why God designed us in his image and what that looked like in the world in which we live, in the real world. And so excellent thoughts on that one. Chapter 5 is entitled More Unbiblical Concepts About Marriage, which is, kind of building furthermore on chapter 4. And there's just a couple of things rather than list all the unbiblical concepts that he listed, there was 2 things that stood out to me in chapter 5.
Okay.
And the first one was that one's priorities have to change radically with a marriage.
Yes.
And that's a really unique one, especially for a culture like ours. And you that are younger couples, one of the things that is really challenging about the culture you have grown up in is that the culture you live in is primarily self-focused.
Yes.
And, the previous generations taught children, and all this had errors to it. There were some very strong upsides, not errors, but some potential challenges, maybe the better way to say that. Like children are supposed to be seen and not heard. That is completely laughed at in our generation. So we've gone the other way to where children are always seen
And always
and
heard.
always heard. And the result of that is that we're very child-focused to the detriment of producing adults.
Right.
And so obviously there can be a balance. We can go off balance on either side of this. But I just really appreciated the fact that he talked about when we first get married in our culture, we are especially all about ourselves. And especially if you got married, the later you get married, the more comfortable you are in your own routines.
Yes.
This is the way I've always done it. This is what I like to eat. This is when I go to bed. This is when I get up. This is how I clean the house. This is how you should clean the house. This is, and we're very self-aware. Even in a sexual sense, the internet and pornography and the prevalence of it in our generation has turned us very inwardly as opposed to looking outwardly to have needs met in that regard. So it really is a very powerful section. Our priorities have to change when we get married. We no longer are focused on our parents or the way our parents did it or the way we celebrated the holidays and my family versus your family. Now we change our priorities. When we get married, our priorities has to be the other person.
Right.
What do you prefer? What do you like? What do you want? How can I serve you? How can I love you? I thought it was an incredible part of chapter 5.
Yes.
And one that can be expounded on in many directions.
Absolutely. And probably the priorities changing radically is probably an overarching view of chapter 5. So that if your priorities are right, where you are seeking God on your own, and then seeking God as a couple, and then seeking each other as a couple, that probably helps with all the other concepts that you might bring in, all of your preconceived notions and expectations and things like that. But if you're doing it right, then you're probably doing it okay.
Yeah, and when you're thinking about things like, the issues that show up in a marriage, communication problems, anger issues, envy or jealousy, or, a person who's very sensitive, overly sensitive, one who gets their feelings hurt, who has to have the last word or always has to have their way, what you're finding there is wrong priorities. And that's really kind of the idea he's developing in chapter 5. We have to realize that the priority is now my spouse,
right,
and also now us as opposed to me.
Right.
And he even says marriage is a commitment to become a new person. We've heard that joke about this idea of, I'll marry and change them. Hopefully they'll change after they get married. And sometimes we even see that in counseling situations, young men who, or even young ladies who have purity issues have the idea that, marriage will correct that. Well, marriage is a commitment to become a new person. It is a commitment to say, I do have to change who I am in my flaws, in my errors. I will become the person that my spouse needs me to be. And that's not a negative thing. It's not like, it's not we're thumbing our nose at God's law. This is not about error and embracing sin and a wicked lifestyle. It's about saying that God puts us together to be aware of each other.
Right.
And so it's a commitment to become a new person.
I would say, you could say it's a commitment to become a better version of who you are. I think one of the things that marriage points out almost immediately on the honeymoon or shortly thereafter, marriage points out how very different you are and how you have brought very different expectations and preconceived notions into your marriage. And so you have an opportunity right from the very start to become a better version of yourself, a version where you are saying, okay, you are my priority. And so if I can change this about myself or how I think about whatever it is, whether it's, I know we have used the illustration of when Matt and Kareth, our son and daughter-in-law, first got married, whether the butter should be in the fridge or whether it should be on the counter. Just something little like that, where you can become a better version of yourself. And what they decided was, we could do one of both. And it not be a problem, or, decide one way or the other, giving of yourself to the other person, giving of your way to the other person.
And maybe there's something to think about here. If you're a very strong-willed person and you've always done it, a certain way, and you're determined to make that happen, maybe your spouse always gives. Maybe you're married to the spouse that just, whatever, I'll do it your way. It might be worth your stopping to think through, what would my spouse want? Because sometimes problems are underlying over a long period of time because you're not aware of your spouse, because your spouse is more apt just to give, whatever.
Right.
So it's a really great chapter, Unbiblical Concepts About Marriage. Ready for chapter 6?
Yes.
3 other chapters we draw your attention to, chapter 6, chapter 7, and chapter 10. In chapter 6, he deals with handling stubborn habits that wreck marriages. and there's a couple things here that I thought was so amazing in this book, and it was this idea. A habit is dislodged only by crowding it out with its biblical alternative.
Right.
And that was a really good idea. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure I've known the concept, but here it's said so simply.
Right.
There are a lot of habits we bring to a marriage, whether it's, I just always react in anger. I always get my feelings hurt. I always default to quietness. I just withdraw and become very quiet and sullen. There's all kinds of habits that we develop into our life. This is how I respond when I don't get my way. This is how I fight for when I want my way. Just things that we do by habit, sometimes not even thinking about them. But the only way to destroy a stubborn habit, say anger, for instance, anger's been an issue for some people's all their lives.
Right.
Well, the way to get rid of that is to replace it with a biblical alternative. And what he lays out here is, how do you find the biblical alternative? We really have to know our Bibles to have great marriages.
Right.
And when you find that, there's a biblical alternative to marriage, or to anger. There's a biblical alternative to anger. When you figure that out and you start applying the biblical alternative, then it really does begin to change who you are into the Christ-like person God designed you, or literally saved you to be.
Right.
And it really is a tremendous, tremendous part of the book.
Right. I was reading a book recently, and I can't remember which book it was because I'm reading several. But the author had said, when dealing with sin issues in your life, it is not good just to eliminate. A lot of people say, I just need to eliminate that from my life. I'm not going to do that anymore. But she brought out the point, like this is, you have to put in there a biblical alternative. And the Bible doesn't talk about replacement. It's not like, I'm just going to move this over here and replace it with. It is actually getting whatever that bad habit is out of your life, that sin habit. And then the Bible calls it adding to. You're going to add to your faith. So you are a Christian, you already have faith. So you're going to add all the different things that are listed, I think, in 2 Peter chapter 1. Or in Ephesians, we know from Ephesians chapter 4, we put off the old man and put on. So it's a really good biblical concept, I think, for a marriage.
Here's a quote that I loved in the book. No change commended by God is unrealistic for those who know Christ as their Savior and are willing to do things His way. Mm. Go back to the anger, or perhaps, some other negative emotion that it's wrong. Maybe you've always had this habit of, lying or stealing. The Bible deals with those as things Christians have to change.
Yes.
Or maybe it is unkindness, or you just are harsh, or you're impatient. Mm-hmm. You're easily bothered. You're easily on edge. Well, God gives us a command to change all of that. And I just love, he said, that's not unrealistic for anyone who knows Christ and are willing to do things His way. And it does bring up several points there. You need to know Jesus Christ, because that brings His strength, His power, but you also need to know His way. And the way to know His way is to put our nose in the Bible, to read it, to study it, to be faithful to church, to connection groups and Sunday schools. We've got to continually study the Bible, hear the Bible, learn the Bible, apply the Bible, or we will never deal with the stubborn habits that continually damage our marriages.
Yes.
It was an excellent chapter.
I think one of the key thoughts in that quote is the word willing, because there are so many people who chalk things up to, well, that's just the way I am, or they even blame the Lord. Well, this is just the way God created me. Or they will say something like this, well, that's just my besetting sin. And everyone has a besetting sin. Well, if we are willing to surrender that to the Lord and allow Him to work in our heart, then it is not unrealistic that He can actually change that sinful habit.
That's exactly right. And so chapter 7 deals with this issue of communication. And as you know, if you've listened to the Keeping It Young podcast much at all, communication is one of the things we cover continually.
Yes.
One of the major issues you're going to find in your marriage is that a lot of the stubborn habits affect communication.
Yes.
If you have an anger issue, you have a communication issue. Mm-hmm. If you have a bitterness issue, you have a communication issue.
Yes.
If you're selfish, you have a communication issue. If you're too busy, you have a communication issue.
Yes.
And this one just continually connects to all the other ones. Communication failures, communication problems. So he even lists several things here. He says communication is essential for developing and maintaining the deep intimacy that God designed for the marriage relationship.
Right.
The way to have a deep, deep, intimate, loving, gentle, amazing marriage relationship, it starts with communication. If you don't master the art of communication, you will not have the deep, intimate relationship that God intends you to have inside a marriage.
True. You guys know how that when you get really busy and you're not even really, you don't have time for those just even quick conversations, everything you're doing is kind of calling over your shoulder, hey, I've got the kids, or I've got this, or I'll pick that up from the store. If that is all your communication has boiled down to, you also know that you feel distant from one another. Maybe you feel some angst towards one another or hurt feelings towards one another. And so communication is essential. There has to be a time during your day where you stop everything and look at each other and say, well, how are you?
And we've been known to have to do that, haven't we?
We have.
And he goes on to talk about in Ephesians 4 through 6, he spends a lot of time in those chapters. And anybody that studies much about marriage and relationships in the Christian life will always spend time in Ephesians, because it is just one of those very practical, very easy to understand, but very helpful books. And he says the Christian walk is not a solitary walk. And this is getting the heart of communication. Walking is what the Bible talks about in Ephesians 4, 6, and 7. We're to walk in love, we're to walk circumspectly, and we're to walk in purity, we're to walk in the light, and the list just goes on and on there. He's talking about walking and walking.
To walk worthy, yes.
And he says that's not a solitary walk, because harmony in walk requires harmony in talk. And I like that little quote there, because we have to continually work at this. And he does bring up in chapter 7, when dealing with communication, the idea of mishandled anger. And he calls it one of the biggest hindrances to communication.
Yeah.
Mishandled anger clams up or blows up. And either one of those is mishandling it.
Yes.
If I clam up, I'm mad, so I'm saying nothing. I'm going to just pout. I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to walk away from my relationship responsibilities. I'm clamming up.
Yes.
That is an error that will damage your marriage. If, on the other hand, I blow up and I just let everything out, and I blow everything over, and I try to be the big bad wolf, and I huff and puff and try to blow the house down.
Right.
We see either one of those errors is a massive problem to the issue of communication.
Yes.
And it ruins it. It pulls it down.
Well, and I would just interject here that probably in counseling, whether I'm just counseling a lady or we are counseling a couple, we hear that over and over and over again, how the anger is a huge issue in Christian homes. And the Bible it's very clear that anger should not be part of our lives.
And one of the things you'll find too is that anger is often generational. A lot of young men were raised with an angry dad or mom. A young lady was raised with an angry dad or mom. And as a result of that, they will themselves follow the habits of the home. And down the road, your grandchildren will be raised with the same anger that you have.
Right.
And that anger then frustrates them and your great-grandchildren. So someone has to come along and say, no, wait a minute, this is not being handled right.
Yes.
We have to learn how to communicate even through the issues that upset us, and we have to communicate in such a way that we are building Christianity, we are strengthening our relationships, we are not undermining Christianity, and we're not damaging our relationships.
Right.
This book is a help for that. He even talks about that we have to speak with each other truth, and he said truth is a hard thing, because sometimes there's things that need to be said that we don't say them because they hurt.
Right.
And so he makes this statement, truth may hurt, but in the long run, it will not hurt like a lie. And it's better that we confront things about each other in a wise, in a godly, in a calm and sweet, Christ-like way, even though it hurts a little bit. Because when we're able to talk reasonably about things that are a problem, things that need to be worked on, things that need to be corrected, and you don't do that in the heat of a moment. You don't unload in the heat of a moment and, you unload on somebody. No, these are the type of conversations that are scheduled, maybe even occur in a counseling session.
Right.
And to apply truth, although it may hurt, it will not hurt like a lie. And truth can be told to another if it is relevant and spoken. Any truth can be told to another if it is relative and spoken in the right manner.
Right.
And that's why we've talked about this several times, so if this is a repeat for some of you, forgive us for that. But you do need to schedule these kind of conversations. You need to make sure they're had in the best possible time. to where you can sit down and have simple and sincere conversations about exactly what's going on in a life.
Right. And this truth is an actual conversation that you do need to have. It is not this concept of, well, I just tell it like it is, and then you're just picking apart the other person all the time. You know, "Oh, seriously, you can't even take out the trash, right? Or haven't I asked you not to do that so many times and there you did it again?" That's not telling the truth in love that we would find in Ephesians chapter 3. That is just picking the other person apart, and being hypercritical your own self, instead of this being a huge issue where you see this problem that you know needs to be confronted. You might need to get some backup, maybe your pastor and wife, and say, "Hey, I really need to talk to my spouse about." Maybe your spouse has a pornography problem, or you notice that your spouse is maybe being a little unwise with someone of the opposite sex, and you know that they just think, "Oh, we're just friends. This is no problem." But you also know that it's an unhealthy relationship. So that's where this truth comes in, where you have to sit down and say, "Hey, I love you, and the only reason I'm saying this to you is because I know in the long run it's going to hurt you and it's going to hurt us."
And when you say something like that in the right way and with the right help, and the spouse reacts to it in the wrong way, then it is indicative that there's a bigger problem there.
Yes.
And that is always true. So it's worth our thinking through there, quite a bit. That's a really good one. And you've got to be cautious about this, because if you're continually nagging each other, or maybe one of you are, you're really sarcastic, and rather than talk about things, you joke about it, cut about it, or sarcastic about it, you're not on the right path. In fact, you're on the wrong path really fast.
Right.
And the other side of that is true if you're just continually nitpicking, or bringing up the past and if we're not careful, we undermine the marriage relationship by these kind of activities.
Right. And there are some, I think, that would say, well, we need to get to the bottom of this. And it's all because of an unrealistic concern that they have, that they're, I don't know, maybe reading the wrong books or watching the wrong TV movies or spending too much time on social media or whatever, where it is causing their heart to fear instead of looking for a real concern. I know ladies have come to me before and said, "Well, what if my husband? What if?" Well, if you don't have some concrete proof, then probably that's just a fear that Satan is putting in your heart to cause some doubt, so that it comes between you and your husband. So be careful about this whole area of, well, we just need to speak the truth in love.
Yes, be careful. So one more chapter here and we're out of time. In chapter 10, he talks a little bit about the relationship of parents and children and husband and wife. And he makes a statement that I thought was just worth kind of, closing out the book with as we've been thinking about it. He says the parent-child relationship is temporary. God says it must be broken. And I thought that was a very interesting way to say it. The husband-wife relationship is the permanent one.
Right.
And moms and dads, that's worth your hearing. Your goal in raising your children is that someday that relationship will be broken. Either they're an adult that you send out for them to be on their own, they're prepared to live on their own, to study on their own, to pay their own bills, to make their own life their own way. Or ideally, God's ultimate plan there is that you help them to find the spouse they're going to live with the rest of their life, and then that relationship is broken because now they have a new relationship, husband and wife. Right.
And what we mean by broken is that they actually leave your home, not broken as in, well, we just don't speak to each other anymore. It's not that type of broken, but eventually your children do need to fly the nest.
And that's God's plan. Train them to fly the nest.
Right. And while you're training them to fly the nest, work on your marriage relationship, because all things being equal and Lord willing, you will still be together.
That's the whole point.
When they fly the nest.
And so what he makes there is that while the parent-child relationship is temporary, the husband-wife relationship is the permanent one. And that's God's plan for the entire relationship. This is an excellent book. And Jay Adams, anything I have read by Jay Adams has always been very helpful. And it clarifies things, it explains things, it simplifies things, it applies. The thing I love about Jay Adams is he continually gives truth and uses the Bible to give it.
Right.
And we just believe that the Bible has the power to change lives, change marriages, and change homes.
Yes.
And so Solving Marriage Problems by J. E. Adams is a dynamite book that we highly recommend to you. Purchase it, read it. It's an easy read, and we guarantee it'll be one that will really help your marriage. Well, we're out of time today. And is any final thoughts you'd want to add before we close out the J. Adams book?
No, I'm looking forward to our next book that we will cover, The DNA of Parent-Teen Relationships.
That is a great book, and we can't wait to introduce that book to you. If you've never heard of it, it would be well worth your going ahead, ordering it, and start reading it, especially if you have teenagers. Well, this is Keeping It Young podcast, and you've been with us now through this whole series. Many of you, thank you for staying with us. And if we can serve you, help you, be a blessing to you in some way, certainly feel free to reach out to us via our website or via our social media. Hope you have a great day, and whatever else you do, remember to serve the Lord with gladness.